In today's hyper-automated world, leadership are constantly on the lookout for the next big technology that's going to help them achieve their goals. Forbes and Gartner and others have indicated that RPA might be that technology that's going to come in and disrupt everything as we know it. Sem, first of all, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. As the CEO of the largest RPA forum on LinkedIn, and please correct me if there's a better way of sort of introducing that, what is your opinion on the lay of the land with regards to RPA and the way things are moving in the industry and around the world?
Yeah, that's very interesting to watch what happened with RPA. The process automation, enterprise process automation software existed for many, many years. And I worked in the industry starting from document processing software, from document management, like all those ECM and workflow systems, and then going to AI and document processing, the data extraction. And then when RPA started, it changed the whole landscape. Before it was kind of systems for enterprises, for IT to figure out. Now with RPA, it's possible to involve many more people into changing those processes. And that helped to increase visibility significantly. The visibility of the problem and the visibility of potential solution. And this is why I think before it wasn't the same big involvement from the entire organization in the automation process as it is now with RPA. But on the opposite side, we think that it created a lot of hype around RPA. And it set some unrealistic expectations among the business leaders and business users. And our goal with RPA Master is actually allow business leaders to see through that hype and understand the technology behind RPA, behind hyperautomation, and see how this technology could be applied for the benefits of the organization.
That's great, awesome. Dr. Basit, I want to ask, you are an award-winning RPA platform. Well, not you personally,
sure.
But Autosphere is.
Sure.
And as Director Strategy of Autosphere, do you share Sem's point of view on this?
Absolutely. We all know within just the media and the digital world, there's been a lot of hype, not just about RPA, but also about AI and so on and so forth. I think that what COVID has done is accelerated the adoption of digital technologies. And I think what Sem is talking about, getting past the hype, I get the sense that we're getting past the hype, if you know what I mean.
Well, let's talk about the hype then. So, Sem, this seems to be like a central sort of theme for RPA Master in debunking the myths and the over-expectations that we all manage to like give the client and other colleagues when we're implementing it internally. But let's talk about some of these myths and how RPA Master and yourself and your team and how you're working to overcome that bit of a hurdle, a bit of a roadblock.
So what we're trying to do with RPA Master is to show some real stories and real case studies behind those automation projects. And that's very important because I think if you hear the marketing messages from vendors, they're positioning RPA as end-to-end automation solution, which can pretty much do everything. And that's somewhat true because since the RPA technology allows you to click buttons and do the mouse clicks, you can pretty much do whatever a human can do. The problem with that, it's in many cases not the most efficient way of automating. And sometimes it's just so complicated to build the right logic of how to click those buttons. So it doesn't make sense to apply RPA everywhere. But still, there are lots of use cases where RPA can be sometimes the only solution. And sometimes would be just the easiest way to move forward with automation. And it takes much less time to implement RPA versus other ways to automate. That's why we want to tell those stories. We want to give an opportunity to business leaders to see what RPA can and cannot do. So they will make a confident decision, and they will see the initial success, and then they will move forward with automation projects.
I mean, I'd add to that is that within the market and within the C-suite, there's almost a legacy of what COVID has done to them.
In more ways than
In
one.
more ways than one, absolutely. In the sense that with COVID, it was all an issue of efficiencies, cutting costs, and so on and so forth.
Surviving, right?
It was about survival. And therefore, by definition, with survival, it's always about cutting costs. And RPA has played a fairly instrumental role in terms of producing those efficiencies. It's a double-edged sword. So on the one hand, it's good that the RPA is being used. So you've got positive use cases where the mouse clicks on all of that is functioning to automate a process which was otherwise a mundane process. The negative side of that is that the C-suite then sees RPA focused on cost cutting. Okay, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it means that you get pigeonholed, or you've pigeonholed RPA in that. And I would second Sem, which is that it's important to show use cases which are wide and varied so that the C-suite sees that it's way beyond just cost cutting. Some of the projects that we've been working on, at least saying within the power sector, we've been trying to interact with the not just the C-suite, but also the process owners to say, well, okay, look, these are the things you can do with RPA, which is beyond the standard efficiencies. And what you actually find is that it's a ooh-ah sort of moment. Oh, I see, you can do this. Oh, I see, you can do this. And I think that the whole idea of showcasing use cases is absolutely vital for a greater adoption of RPA in a wider range of applications. Maybe Sem would have some comments on that.
Yes, actually, if we talk about COVID specifically, I think it was the most impactful single event to drive automation.
For sure.
Because before COVID, we talked a lot about digital transformation, and all organizations, they kind of looked into that, but it was nice to have. It's a lot of competitive advantage, and you can build better customer service, and you can build more efficient processes. But after pandemic, it became really a must-have change. The question is really to be or not to be for the organization. And that changes the allocation of budgets, the power play in the C-suite. What we noticed happened in the C-suite before IT and the CIO as the head of IT, they were more in the supporting function. So they need to enable infrastructure, so organization functions, but their budgets were somewhat limited, and they had to just make sure that everything works. During the pandemic, in a few weeks, they got this opportunity and the challenge to make the organization work in the new environment. So they became those heroes who saved the organization. And now they still have this opportunity, and the entire C-suite looks at them as a leader who can change the way how organization works. In the digital digital world, the CIO becomes more like an operation officer, because when operations are digital, and now they have much stronger position on the C-suite, and they also have this is what we're hearing from CIOs. They have budgets available for digital transformation, and now the question is not about resources; it's more about how fast you can move.
Right.
So the timing is the pressure. And the technologies like RPA, which can help you to make the progress a little faster, those are also very valuable.
In terms of the projects that we've been doing, I could probably bifurcate the projects into accounting and finance ones, which I'm sure Sem will resonate with, are the classical, well-defined use cases.
Exactly.
But interestingly, even within the financial sector, we've looked at using RPA for risk management, operational risk management, which is obviously outside your classical accounting and finance problem where it's a well-defined process. And it's a very pleasant discussion when you find with senior managers that to say they actually want to look at ways by which they can use digital technology for risk management and are also considering RPA for that. So I actually think that there's been quite an interesting transition from using RPA for classical, very simple finance use cases into more difficult ones, into more challenging use cases.
In many of those cases, we're not talking just about RPA, the simple technology that allows you to follow the rules and click the buttons. We're talking more about intelligent automation when we combine RPA with AI and ML technologies. And when you talk about risk management use case, for example, you normally would have some ML model which allows you to predict those risks. And then RPA would be the engine which helps you to execute, while the ML part will help you to think and make decisions. Do you need to approve this, or you need to postpone or send it to the human review? So what we see is that if we're talking about intelligent automation in general, we're kind of having two arms, which is RPA, which can click buttons. And we also have a head with AI that allows you to understand text, read documents, understand voice, communicate with humans, and make some decisions which are rule-based decisions or based on trained AI models. And that gives the power to really automate many of those knowledge worker tasks and run much more efficient organization. But it's still a growing space, emerging space. We see some applications like for document processing or for chatbot, the automatic communications, but still there is a lot to be done to really drive the adoption of those technologies for many other use cases.
Can I just pose a question to you, Sam? Where is the challenge? Is it in the number of use cases for this sort of intelligent automation, or is it the vision or the thinking of the C-suite, or a combination of both? Because I have I have an interesting perspective, but I'll be intrigued with what you would say.
Okay, interesting. I think from the marketing side, and I spend my time mostly with product marketing and product development, and we always painted those big visions how you can automate many different processes, and the technology allows you to do a lot. So I think many people in C-suite know that the technology theoretically can automate document processing for you, can automate chat communications for you. But the reality, it's not always that easy. So for document processing, for example, since you have many different document types, you have to train different models, and the extraction of additional fields from those documents would require you retraining of those models. So those are pretty complicated projects. And right now, when companies like Google and Amazon, they started providing those technologies out of the box as a part of their platform, and they're training those on millions of documents, we see that the quality of AI is getting higher, but it still requires somewhat significant investments to really train it for your specific use cases. And I think there are two sides to the questions, to the question as you asked it. From the C-suite, they don't see those quick results and like very, very successful results. And that's why they may feel, oh, that's a good investment, but maybe it's a longer term investment. And from the technology side, also many vendors would claim that they can do out of the box all kinds of automations, but in reality, those projects, they take a little longer and require significant investment in order to really work for a lot of use cases.
Isn't this something that's kind of ubiquitous across all sorts of emerging technologies or nascent technologies that you would kind of expect? There's a degree of, well, let's say there's a learning curve or there's an adoption curve. Like Google wasn't created in a day. Facebook was not created in a day. The kind of products, the way they stand, the way we see them today is the result of an evolution rather than just one waterfall implementation. So for example, with your IDP component, the intelligent document processing component, you've got several different types of, let's call them templates or formats that you would train the model on. Now, obviously, if you've got a lot of different types, you've got different types or format types coming in, you will create those templates faster. You'll create those models faster. But if you're not doing as many implementations or don't have that degree of diversity in the documents, you're not going to be as well equipped as the next man or the next RPA or the next IDP product. So there's this, the question is,
there's almost a contradiction.
Yeah, it's almost like a contradiction.
What I'd say here is that, like any technology, once you have applications or a use case, you see the problems, which are actually opportunities or challenges, and you develop your product better. And there's that feedback loop. The real challenge, I'd say that with RPA, the whole subject of process automation is a bit more sensitive because you are introducing technology which is core to business processes. So the C-suite is a bit more cautious about implementing that because it just wants to see that ROI. It's got 3 years, 5 years, where it's got to give those results. Okay, so it's a bit more sensitive. Just adding to the point that Sem said, and maybe Sem, you can comment on this. I've actually thought about what would be the ideal C-suite person I want to deal with in RPA. Please describe for me what would be the ideal C-suite for you.
Ideal C-suite? I think this person needs to be responsible for operations of the company. And
you mean someone hands-on, someone who's not in an ivory tower, but rather knows what's going on at the user level. Absolutely.
So we're normally talking to CFO or COO on the business side. But also we need to involve IT and the CIO to help with this implementation. And with RPA, I've seen some vendors, they entertain the idea that you can do it without IT because it's kind of easier to implement than the regular integrations. So you kind of can sell it to business users and do services for them and automate something for them. And since you kind of do it on top of existing systems, you don't really need to get too deep and get too much involvement from IT, but it doesn't work like that. So it has to be managed as a proper initiative program from IT side. And what we also see that the idea of citizen development, when your business users can quickly learn and run those RPA projects, doesn't work for many organizations. So it's like an emergent thing, but the real automations are still built mostly by RPA developers, technical people, because in many cases, it doesn't make sense for you to buy an expensive RPA platform to build some simple automations when you move files from one folder to another folder, or do some other easy things which every business user can kind of automate. The real value comes from more complicated automations when you have many tasks connected, when you handle exceptions, when it's a robust resilience, so if something changes, it still works. And in this case, you really need more experienced people to build those automations. And that's why you always need to involve the technical people into those projects.
Sorry, I just wanted to add, I've been working with some projects in the power sector, and my perspective of almost the perfect C-suite would be your engineer who's done software, who's done IoT, and who's done data mining and so on and so forth. Why? Because then he's looking at his process.
You find many of those, Dr. Basit.
I'll give you an example of it. Let me just complete mine. Now, I have found one. So he's looking at his process and he's actually saying, well, okay, I can automate it with these elements of IoT. The IoT will give me this data, and with this data, I can add that level of automation with RPA and so on and so forth. So in the power sector, I haven't found it, but I did find somebody in the fintech. I found a member in the C-suite in the fintech who was obviously finance. He was a CEO of a bank, but he went and did software. And then with software, then he went and studied server technology. And then he went and did cybersecurity.
Sounds like a polymath.
So I think that it's actually important, and one of the reasons why raising the subject with you is actually quite important to get the message over to the C-suite that they have to be more agile and versatile in terms of the technologies that they are adopting outside their own domain. I think it's a very important point. And it's only through that they will actually deliver the efficiencies for their own industry as well.
Mm-hmm. What I also think happened with RPA, which is kind of unique and interesting. I had a conversation earlier this week with one implementation partner. They do intelligent automation services projects in France. And they were saying, for most of our projects, they don't sell licenses. The licenses for RPA were already purchased before, and then company invited them to figure out what to do with those licenses.
We've had similar situations. Absolutely. Yeah.
Because people, they don't really understand. They see this hype, they react to that. They heard that RPA is a cool thing and will help them to solve some problems, and they buy it. And now they're trying to figure out what to do with it.
I can't agree more. In fact, we've got Autosphere obviously is part of our group, but it's actually more than that. Autosphere is one of our RPA partners. We have a couple of other partners as well, Automation Anywhere and UiPath. Don't look at me like that. Anyway, my point is that actually a lot of the, let's say, the queries and business that we get for your counterparts, let's say, is because they've purchased these licenses, hundreds of thousands of dollars of licenses, and
they don't know what to do.
They don't know what to do with them. They don't know how to move forward with them. They don't have the internal structure. Let's say the strategy is not aligned. It's like, I've got bricks, mortar, and all this stuff. Now I need an architect.
Yeah.
And they're literally going to waste without, getting that utilization. So I couldn't agree more.
It's not even restricted to that. We also have a sister company that deals with conversational AI.
Yes.
And we've interacted with industry where they've actually gone and purchased well-known conversational AI engines.
All right.
Let's just leave it like that.
Leave it there.
They've purchased a license and then they've realized, well, we don't know how to implement it.
Yeah.
And then so it's quite embarrassing.
Yeah.
One of the things that that sort of comes to mind, and again, I can put it across to Sem as a question, but it's in my mind, which is that how can RPA support the wider digital transformation? And you summarized it very well in the initial part, where you talked about there was lots of discussion about process automation, digital transformation, so on and so forth in the pre-COVID days. But that was just nice talk. It was table talk or fireside talk that we got here.
You've got to admit that's the basic evolutionary path. Though,
No, this is right. This is right. But post-COVID, it's become real. What role can RPA play in the wider digital transformation of industry? By industry, I mean across the board, whether it's BFSI or even the power sector. How can RPA actually contribute in that wider drive towards digital transformation?
I would ask, where can it not contribute, Dr. Basit?
Let's see what Sem says.
Sem?
I think
Your
I have
thoughts?
a very interesting perspective. Again, because I came from marketing, I think that when we use those words like digital transformation and even RPA and intelligent automation right now, and even AI, those are all kind of hype-generating marketing terms, which do not have and should not have business value for people. So people who are business leaders, they need to focus on their processes and solving their business challenges, rather than focusing on how to implement digital transformation or RPA or intelligent automation. And that's critical,
Yeah.
because if you try to follow the hype and buy the next coolest technology, you will end up in the situation when you bought something you don't know what to do. And the opposite example I can give, I recently read a book by Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart. And back in 70s and 80s, they built a network to connect their super centers or stores at that time with their distribution centers to be able to see all the transactions, to be able to process those orders and exchange information between those stores. And it was way before the internet even existed, at least at the global scale. So they just needed this to solve the problem. They had certain processes they need to set up. They built the technology. They didn't follow the hype. They created their own technology to do those things. And the one example that Sam gives in his book is that he was able to communicate with his employees through the screens they had in the break rooms in those centers back in 80s. He died in 1992, before the internet boom happened. And he was already working with many of those technologies which companies started adopting later. So I think that's the way how leaders need to think about technology. It's really about how you are solving specific problems. And when suddenly all your employees started working from home, you need to solve this problem. Use Zoom or use some automation or use something else. But at the same time, you need to look ahead a little bit, because we've heard stories when people were reporting they started RPA projects back in 2019, before pandemic. And they said, because we did those investments before, then when pandemic hit, we still were able to serve customers and nothing was disrupted. So that type of vision, I think all those new technologies like RPA, the important part is that they give the awareness about what's possible. So business leaders can think about how now they can solve their business challenges, rather than think about how to implement the specific technology. And that happens, it's not just about automation, also things like cloud. It's one thing to say I'm moving to cloud, and the second thing is figure out how specifically your business can work differently on the cloud versus how you do it right now. So I think the key here is to think from the business side, from the process side, from the customer service side rather than from the technology side?
I think it's a perfect answer in the sense that the whole discussion is about business strategy and it's about business transformation. The digital is just the enabler, right, Sam?
Yes.
The digital is only the enabler. And if it's seen outside the context of being an enabler, then you're already on a loser. You're going to lose out on the implementation and the deployment.
I think that's a fantastic place to kind of call it, call it a what?
Call it a day.
Call it a day. I thought you said something else. Anyway, so I think these conversations they could go on forever and ever and ever. And Sam, I think I would like to continue this conversation maybe at a later date. Also, is it okay if I put your LinkedIn links out on with this video so that people can follow you and see what you guys are up to? You guys all right with that? Well, that means you guys need to follow him now. So I'll be there too. But follow these guys. They're the people you need to be following.
Absolutely.
Thank you for the honor.